Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, let's talk a little bit about the trade deadline. Yeah, it's a couple months away. Brian Windhorst at ESPN is, of course, talking about the potential for trades. Mentioned the Wolves. Could they be doing something prior to the deadline? I want to break that down. What are the odds something like that happens? Plus, we'll preview the Wolves matchup with the Dallas Mavericks, an exciting game Thursday night that we're all looking forward to. I think it's all upcoming on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. It is a Timberwolves game day, a rare Thursday game for the Wolves as they take on the Dallas Mavericks in Dallas here Thursday night. We'll preview that matchup. Actually spent a decent chunk of the show talking about that today. It's the first time the Wolves have seen the Mavs this year. Dallas is playing great. Still no Kyrie Irving. They're a bit bruised and battered, but have been scoring a ton of points lately. So I want to break down that matchup. I think it's pretty interesting. But let's start with what are the chances the Wolves make a trade at some point this season? I think it's worth unpacking, especially Brian Windhorst is talking about it at ESPN, and it's something that now that we're about at that December 15th deadline, right? It's tomorrow, where guys signed in the offseason can now be traded. So that's when unofficial trade season heats up here for the next couple of months. So I want to break that down a bit further here today. We'll get into that here next. A big thank you, though, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken. I also want to mention tonight after the game, of course, we'll have the live postcast with Jack Borman, who will be joining Luke Inman over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. The audio from that will be available here on the Locked On Wolves audio feed, wherever you listen to podcasts. And also, if you're not able to watch the game live, you can catch every bucket from Wolves-Mavs on the Hometown broadcast with the fantastic Alan Horton on SiriusXM on the SXM app. You just search Minnesota Timberwolves, and you'll find that audio feed. Again, the Hometown broadcast on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves. All right. Let's talk. Let me first kind of read off what Windy says here over at ESPN. This is an ESPN Plus article, so you have to have a insider subscription or whatever it's called these days. And the article is just holes on championship contenders, right? Like, what holes do these rosters have that need to be potentially could be filled at the deadline? So he says Timberwolves roster hole is perimeter scoring. Why? He says the Wolves are the best defense in the NBA and tremendous size, but rank in the bottom half in offense. Minnesota could use another scoring threat to help Anthony Edwards on the perimeter. Not exactly how I'd frame that. We'll get back to that in a second. What they have to trade, he says the Timberwolves can't trade a first. They have a couple of second rounders left, but are in salary cap jail after this season. Kyle Anderson has a $9 million expiring salary, but it's hard to see Minnesota taking on money after this season. Chances of a significant trade, he says, unlikely. The team is below the apron, but could be a buyout destination. All right, so what he means by that, the last piece of it, I guess we'll probably get back to this, but because the Wolves are below the apron and obviously could also sign vet minimums, they also have a roster spot, right? The Wolves have carried an open roster spot all season. So I will just start with the end of this, and I promise I'm not there's still meat on the bone here to discuss because anything's possible, right? I do think the most likely scenario is the Wolves don't make a trade at all, and they find somebody on the buyout market, or perhaps it's elevating a two-way deal to the roster. That's probably less likely. Come trade deadline time-ish, maybe even in January if they don't think they're likely to make a trade at that point. As guys start to get bought out, and then, of course, there's 10-day contracts that can be signed in January. I think the Wolves will just kind of look at their situation, their health at that point in time, and try and figure out who they might be able to add, if anybody, on the open market in that fashion. So I think that's more likely. That said, Windhorst isn't wrong. The Wolves need some more perimeter shooting. Where I think he's a bit off is his characterization of like Ant needing more help on the perimeter. I mean, I don't know. I feel like Karl-Anthony Towns is a pretty good 3-point shooter, right? I mean, what he's almost 43% on the season and a career 40% 3-point shooter. You know, anyway, I would frame that a little bit differently. The Wolves stars can shoot threes. Cat and Ant are both really good 3-point shooters. Ant more from a volume and distance standpoint, and Cat, and also he can get a shot off at any point against anyone. And Cat just from an accuracy standpoint. In fact, the 4 Wolves starters that aren't Rudy Gobert are all shooting above league average from outside the arc. Jaden McDaniels is still over 37%. He's only played in 12 games. But McDaniels and Ant are both north of 37%. Cat's almost 43%, and so is Mike Conley. So really, it's the bench that we're talking about, right? Like, it's the bench that isn't shooting threes. Well, Nas, of course, was over 40% a couple weeks ago and has been in a massive slump from deep until the other night. But he'd been shooting lights out from deep. Troy Brown, was 1 for 6 from beyond the arc last time out, but before that had been shooting it great. Alexander Walker, one of the reasons I was a bit dubious about re-signing him this offseason is the track record of shooting threes wasn't as good as what he did in a Wolves uniform last year. And even that was pretty, mediocre-ish. And that's what's happened so far this year. He shot it great for Team Canada in the World Cup, and he shot it great in preseason, but he's 34.4% so far this season. And obviously Shake is much worse than you'd expect him to be at 25%. The Wolves as a team are 14th in percentage. So it's really more a lack of volume. They're 18th in 3-point attempt rate. And I spent a long time, actually a full show a couple weeks ago, talking about the lack of volume of 3-point attempts for the Wolves. Volume needs to go up. They're middle of the pack in terms of percentage. That's not the number one problem for this team. But I would say if you're going to look for one skill, which is typically, unless you're making a blockbuster at the deadline, you're looking for a skill that you need help with, right? It could be rebounding. It could be perimeter defense. It could be rim protection. It could be 3-point shooting, right? Or whatever. 3-point shooting is the one of those things because you're not going to obviously add a rotation big. Like the Wolves have 3 of those. They don't need another, and 4 if you include Kyle Anderson. It's not, a starter. It's not a perimeter defender, right? So if it's anything, it's shooting because you could always have another shooter. And as soon as somebody goes down, you ideally could go to somebody that, like Josh Minot's great. And I'm excited for him to get rotation minutes at some point, probably next year. He's not a 3-point shooter. That's his limitation, right? We know Wendell Moore is not a 3-point shooter, among other things, right? So the depth, like, it'd be great to have somebody else that could shoot. But that's also probably more a buyout market thing than it is like, hey, let's trade a real asset for somebody who's a marginally better shooter than Troy Brown Jr., right? So I think the depth of this team is good enough that it's really unlikely the Wolves make a trade. Now, Windhorst mentions the Kyle Anderson expiring contract. That actually came up on the Minnesota Basketball Party podcast, which actually, if you haven't listened to it already, quick plug, it's the last audio episode. If you're listening, wherever you listen to podcasts, the last episode before this one in the Locked On Wolves feed is the Minnesota Basketball Party. Myself, editor-in-chief of Canis Supus, Jack Borman, Reggie Wilson, the anchor, sports anchor at Care 11, and Ron Johnson of the Ron Johnson Show, and Sam Ekstrom, who hosts it, talked to Mike Conley and what are the chances he gets an extension? And the Kyle Anderson expiring came up as like, hey, this is, maybe the one potential trade piece the Wolves have. And, they could trade him for someone, right? And then free up some additional space this year if they want to get an extension done or whatever with Conley. I guess that wouldn't really work. But if they wanted to play around with that. Now, even though Kyle Anderson has not been nearly as good this year as he was last year, we're still only a quarter of the way through the season. And he still provides that size and team defense that the Wolves need off the bench. So I'd be really surprised if they trade Kyle Anderson. But that would really be the only move they could make is by trading Slow-Mo and, a 2nd-round pick or whatever and try and bring in some shooting. But again, like, I just don't know. Now you don't have your, that guy that can play the 3 and the 4, right? Like Taurean Prince was that guy last year. He's gone. Now it's Kyle Anderson. That's the swing 3-4 guy. Who is it after that? I guess Troy Brown can play in like tiny lineups, can play the 4. Jaden McDaniels doesn't play a whole lot of 4 anymore, right? So you lose a lot of size if you do that. And the team like Chris Finch wants to play big. So I just don't think it's likely the Wolves to make any sort of significant deal, mostly because they don't have cap space. They don't have picks, as Windhorst points out. but also because, like, what do you get it if you check out? You're not going to trade Mike Conley, who's also an expiring contract, like a huge expiring contract. Why would they ever do that? That doesn't make any sense. So I think it's pretty unlikely. Obviously, something to keep tabs on. And it's fun for the Wolves to be able to keep an eye out on the buyout market. Like, that's not a typical thing for Wolves fans to do because, most guys, like, why would you come to Minnesota if you're bought out? Well, this year, Minnesota's sitting here right now is still the best or second best team in the entire league. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's far more likely that the Wolves make a move in terms of the buyout market in January, February, March than on the actual trade market. All right. I do want to dig into the Mavs matchup and actually spend the rest of the show talking about that. I think it's a pretty intriguing matchup. So we're going to get to all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Of course, we're at the height of the NFL playoff race. And, we also have like tons of NBA. Wolves obviously play tonight, plus NFL tonight. So both going on here Thursday night. College football bowl season's upcoming. Plus, there's NFL games on Saturday now because college football's over except for the bowl game. So you get NFL tonight, NBA tonight, and Friday night, NFL and NBA Saturday. Like, it's a big weekend in sports. It's the perfect time to join FanDuel. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and continue a fantastic NFL season at FanDuel. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Wolves-Mavs. So, actually, let's quick touch on Conley. I realized I had that on the rundown there, and I talked about it on the basketball party, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. The Wolves certainly could extend Mike Conley this year. The cliff notes are Conley, his deal's up at the end of the season. He's getting paid like $23 million or something this year. Though he is extension eligible, but because of the Wolves' status next year, getting an actual extension done. Like, you may remember Patrick Beverley, 2 years ago, the Wolves extended him and then ended up trading him in the offseason. I guess that would have been 2 years ago. Like, it's possible they could theoretically do it, but because the number that Conley's currently getting paid is so high, and the Wolves have extensions kicking in next year, like the Ant extension, et cetera. It's pretty unlikely an extension gets done now. It's possible though. And in the offseason, would he resign? We talked about this on the basketball party, so go listen to the full conversation. We all had slightly different takes on this, but nobody that could pay like Conley's made like $230 million. We had the number on the show early on yesterday's show. In his career, he's not going to hold out for $25 million. I also don't think anyone's going to give 37-year-old Mike Conley 25, 26, 27 million in free agency next year, even on a 1 or 2 year deal. So if he isn't looking for that contract, he's not likely to get that contract. Plus, at this stage, he's trying to win a championship, right? He's never played past. I think he got to the conference finals 1 year with Memphis, and with Utah, never did. So he's only on his third team. He's playing for a deep playoff run and hopefully a championship. And the Wolves now can offer that plus familiarity. So I'd be shocked if there were too many other teams that could have a competitive offer for Mike Conley in free agency that he'd be interested in. This is going to require a lot of shuffling of the deck for Minnesota. They'll likely need to, trade Wendell Moore Jr., attach a pick to him, maybe even, maybe not. I mean, there's still obviously upside there. So maybe they could just straight up get off his guaranteed rookie deal. You have to decline Shake Milton's option, let him go. There's a handful of kind of housekeeping things. And I think Jack mentioned it all on the show, on the basketball party show. But I think sitting here right now, like obviously absurdly early, 6 months before we have to legitimately have this conversation, assuming an extension doesn't get done before then, I would even say likely that Mike Conley ends up back in Minnesota on a friendly for both sides, an agreeable, $8, $9, $10 million 1 year deal, or maybe 1 year plus an option for year two. And that's, I think, a reasonable deal for Mike Conley at this age, and also with how important he's been to the Wolves this season. So, and going back to last year's trade deadline. So I think that's the most likely scenario. We'll obviously spend more time on that here later in the season as we get closer to the deadline and closer to next offseason, and talk real numbers and all that stuff. So something to keep an eye on and consider. But no doubt the Wolves front office has, plan A, B, and C here all lined out related to Conley. All right, let's talk about the Mavs matchup. I want to talk about the line first, and we may circle back to this. Literally, as I was making this graphic, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm putting up the graphic right now. FanDuel has the Wolves as a 1-point underdog at Dallas on Thursday night. Over-under is 229 points. As I was making the graphic, the FanDuel line changed from +1.5 to +1. Don't have any idea if there's any info on Ant out there. I mean, he's still listed as questionable for this game, as is Jaden McDaniels and Jordan McLaughlin. Of course, McDaniels and McLaughlin both played on Monday night against New Orleans, and Ant did not play. They had all been listed as questionable heading into the game. So they're all questionable for this game, but the line shifted in the Wolves' favor, still 1-point underdogs. I'm a little surprised by that. I know the Mavs have won 4 straight. I know it's in Dallas. I know Ant's questionable, but Kyrie Irving's not playing. And I don't know. There's just not a whole lot else there for Dallas. Now, I did say on the Basketball Party show, I thought the Wolves would lose to the Mavs. That was just a prediction based on how well the Mavs offense has been playing and some of the spotty play from the Wolves recently. And Dallas is good. They have a bit of a home court advantage. But all that to say, I actually don't mind the Mavs matchup for the Wolves. And so I want to kind of pick that apart a little bit. Let's start with my keys to the game. And again, if you're on YouTube, you can see I have the keys to the game up on the screen. I'm going to go down the list here. Number 1, the Timberwolves need to own the glass against this Mavs team. Dallas is not a good rebounding team. They're 26th in defensive rebound rate. They're 21st in offensive rebound rate. And they're just, in general, a bad defensive team. So the Wolves, there's no excuse for the Wolves to not put up some points in this game and also get some cheap buckets on offensive rebounds. The Wolves don't have a huge focus on offensive rebounding, but we know Rudy Gobert can clean up. Just a couple of games ago, he had, it seemed like a dozen, not actually, I don't know, 5. It was literally 5 or 6 offensive rebounds in that game. I think it was 2. I think it was Saturday's game. Rudy can do some work on the offensive glass occasionally. Conley, McDaniels, some of the guards can sneak in and do that. The Wolves are only 19th in offensive rebound rate on Basketball Reference, but they have a chance to do some damage there. And they also, defensive rebounding wise, the Wolves have steadied that a bit. They're actually 10th right now in defensive rebound rate. And with Dallas being bottom third of the league in terms of offensive rebound rate, that's a place the Wolves really should dominate in this game. And, a weakness of the Wolves that, I shouldn't say weakness because they are 10th in defensive rebound rate, but an area that's traditionally been a weakness last couple of years, and at times is a major point in which the Wolves kind of lapse in. They have the ability to really dominate on the glass in this game. The second thing I have on my keys is contest under control. What I mean by that is get out on the perimeter, get your hand in someone's face, but close out under control. The reason why this is so important is that Dallas is number 1 in the entire league in 3-point makes per game. They're number 2 in 3-point attempt rate and 3-point attempts per game. They're number 8 in percentage, 37.9% as a team. That's 8th league-wide coming into play on Wednesday of this week. They also play fast. They're 7th in pace. So Dallas wants to 3-point you to death. That's what they do. You look at their profile over at Cleaning the Glass. This year, they're number 1 in the league in corner 3-point attempts. Last year, they were number 1 in the league in corner 3-point attempts. They're number 2 in terms of all 3-point frequency. I mentioned that over at Basketball Reference. Same thing at Cleaning the Glass. They finished last year 3rd. In fact, they've been top 5 as an organization in terms of 3-point attempt rate going all the way back to 2015-16. That's 9 seasons, including this year. They just shoot a ton of threes. And they also don't get to the line all that often. I shouldn't say that. They're middle of the pack, but it's basically Luka, right? They're 16th in offensive free throw rate. Luka attempts 8 free throws per game. Kyrie, who isn't going to play, is 3.6 free throw attempts per game. Nobody else is more than 2.5 free throw attempts per game. So this team is shooting threes. They actually don't get to the line all that often. They don't shoot in the paint all that much. It's mostly threes and then some mid-range stuff mixed in. So interestingly, this is an area where Rudy Gobert, like I'm curious to see what the Wolves do with Rudy in this game. If he's in a straight drop ball game, like Luka's going to eat that alive, right? And because the Mavs don't actually get into the paint and try and score at the rim all that often, like that obviously is what Rudy does, right? Their rim frequency attempts, their shots within 4 feet of the basket, they are 29th in the league this season. They were 26th last year, 29th the year before. So you go back all of Luka's career, they've been between 26th and 29th in a season in terms of shots at the rim within 4 feet of the basket, according to Cleaning the Glass. They're more middle of the pack when it comes to mid-range shots, fluctuates a little bit for them, but never that low and never that high. It's always kind of that, 15 to 20-ish range in terms of league ranking. So threes and mid-range shots, and Rudy's less helpful there, right? So how will the Wolves defend? I think that'll be interesting to keep an eye on, and I think closing out under control on the perimeter is going to be really impactful or really important as well. Let's get to my third key and a couple other points on the Wolves-Mavs matchup. We'll do that here next as we close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Dave. At one time or another, we all need a little financial help. That's why Dave is great. Dave can get you cash when you need a hand between paychecks and can help you build credit by settling extra cash advances on time. Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. It's part of Dave's extra cash account. Advance the money you need with no interest and then settle up later. Download Dave today at dave.com/LockedOnNBA. Extra cash with Dave gives you more money to buy groceries, fill your tank, finally get your car repaired, or catch up on bills without having to wait for your next paycheck. You can even build credit when you settle up on time. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to make their finances easier. If you're in a pinch, get the help you need by downloading Dave. Again, download Dave today at dave.com/LockedOnNBA. That's dave.com/LockedOnNBA. You could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/LockedOnNBA. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. All right, third key to the game for Wolves-Mavs, and it's for the Wolves offense, which, of course, scuffled mightily with no Anthony Edwards in the lineup in Monday's loss to New Orleans. And key number 3 is get to the basket / get to the free throw line. Of course, those things are definitely linked to one another. The Mavericks have a bad defense. Currently, they're, according to Basketball Reference, they're 21st in defensive rating. They also do a really good job at avoiding foul trouble, and they like to play fast. So if the Wolves, they don't turn other teams over, opponents over a whole lot either. So what the Wolves need to do in this game is not simply settle for 3-point shots that are going to allow long rebounds for a poor rebounding team. There's just more variance in long rebounds. So more 3-point shots equals more long rebounds equals more transition opportunities for Dallas, who wants to play fast. And also it means you're not putting pressure on a Dallas defense that isn't likely to foul you anyway, but you have to force the issue against them, right? There isn't a whole lot you're worried about in terms of what, Dallas's bigs. Like, Grant Williams is fine, but like, are you afraid of Grant Williams, blocking your shot in the paint? Like, Derek Lively's nice and he will block a couple shots in this game, but like, this is a team that the Wolves should be able to get into the paint against and score against and hopefully draw some fouls. Dallas's defense, let's see, effective field goal percentage, they're 20th in the league. Minnesota just needs to be aggressive, and obviously Ant playing would go a long way toward accomplishing that. Like, him being aggressive, getting downhill, getting into the paint, getting to the line would be huge in this game. But again, limit the long rebounds, limit the transition opportunities for Dallas, and try and combat Dallas's 3-point shooting ability with getting to the free throw line and scoring in the paint. The Wolves did not do enough of that. Like, they were out free throwed 40 attempts to 19 against New Orleans. Part of that was just the Pels and Zion being ultra aggressive and getting a ton of calls. But without Ant, the Wolves did not get to the rim enough against New Orleans. And this is a team that Dallas is a team the Wolves should be able to get into the paint and get it to the rim against quite a bit. Get them warmed up for Indiana. I mean, Indiana, the Wolves should score 1 billion points against Indiana on Saturday. But, this is kind of like, we need to see it. We need to see this, especially if Ant does not play. We need to see the Wolves be aggressive, getting into the paint, trying to get to the line. Dallas, like injury wise, I mean, they're missing Josh Green's likely not going to play. Kyrie Irving's not going to play. Derek Jones Jr. didn't play on Tuesday against the Lakers. Maxi Kleber has been out for a little while. He's still out. So I don't know, like, yeah, they're winning a bunch of games, but I mean, when they beat Memphis the other night, it was Luka scored 35. Nobody else had more than 19, and 19 off the bench was Jaden Hardy scoring 19 off the bench. And like they shot 43% as a team from outside the arc. Crazy, right? Last time out, they beat the Lakers. They hung 127 on them. Doncic had 33. Tim Hardaway Jr. had 32 off the bench. You had 26 points and 7 of 9 shooting from 3 for Dante Exum. Like, that's not going to happen again, right? And then, a couple nights after scoring 20 plus, Jaden Hardy scores 2 on 7 shots, right? So, yeah, Dallas has had some impressive wins here lately, and you go down the list, they've scored 120 plus in the last 4 games. They hung 147 on the Jazz 4 games ago, beat them by 50. They beat the Blazers by 13. They beat the Grizzlies by 7, and then they beat the Lakers by a bucket on Tuesday. But they also lost to the Grizzlies by 14 just a week and a half ago. This has just been a wildly inconsistent team with a great offense and a bad defense. And with no Kyrie Irving, like, this is a very winnable game with or without Ant. I'm still surprised the Wolves are 1-point underdogs in this game. It's not a bad matchup for Minnesota. The one thing that worries me is what I mentioned earlier regarding how you defend a team that only wants to shoot threes when Rudy is your guy. And this is maybe a peek at like, how do the Wolves handle teams like this in the playoffs with Rudy Gobert? And everybody knows the whole Utah, like Rudy getting played off the floor by 5-out offenses, etc. And I'm on the record as saying like, hey, it's not the same thing because the Wolves perimeter defenders are leaps and bounds ahead of where Utah's were pretty much the entirety of Gobert's career in Utah. And I still think that's true. But if Ant doesn't play, now you're just talking Jaden McDaniels, game 2 back from a sprained ankle, assuming he plays again. He's listed as questionable. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has to come to play. No Kyrie makes a big difference because you really are only worried about Luka attacking you off the dribble. And if someone else beats you, fine. It can't keep happening, right? Like, this team's not going to win 5 in a row, right? I know Dallas is currently 4th in the West. I just don't think that that's really all that sustainable, given what Dallas does and does not have on their roster. So will be a ton of fun. This could be a really fun matchup. I'm excited to see the Wolves take on the challenge of Luka and hopefully win on the road here. So again, Wolves 1-point underdogs there over at FanDuel. Go check it out at FanDuel. Go check that line out. I picked the Wolves to lose on the basketball party, but the more I looked into this matchup, I think it's going to be a high-scoring, exciting game, and it's going to be close. So the line reflects that. So, maybe I'm not going out on a limb there, but I do think this will be a good game. I'm excited to watch it. And of course, we'll have the live postcast at the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. I will have the post-game pod up bright and early Friday morning, so be sure to tune into that as well. And if you can't watch the game, then you can listen on SiriusXM, the SXM app, search Minnesota Timberwolves to listen to the hometown broadcast with Alan Horton, Wolves-Mavs on the SXM app, SiriusXM radio. And again, live postcast after, postgame pod Friday. We got you covered. So be sure to tune into all of that as well. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, you can listen wherever you find podcasts. You can watch on YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.